Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. And we're looking at the prospect of not one but two major party candidates in this country of being on the ballot on election day, first round late April, second round early May for the presidential election, while still being under formal investigation, both with parliamentary payroll scandals. In part one of our discussion, we were in the company of Nicolas Vineker of Politico Europe, European Member of Parliament Constance Le Grip of François Fillon's European People's Party. Well, I guess Les Républicains is the party here in France. Yes. We're with attorney Stéphane de Navacelle, and we're now joined from the University of Nottingham by Paul Smith. Welcome to the show. Paul, we were talking just before the break about why the mud seems to be sticking to Fillon, not so much to Marine Le Pen. What is your take on that from the other side of the channel?
Well, it's very odd, isn't it? But I think that part of it is that when Le Pen talks about the system coming after her, quite a lot of that seems to be accepted by her supporters, so that while Fillon, being inside of the system, really ought to be cleaner from the point of view of his supporters, because we've seen a dip in his popularity. I think what's happening is that Le Pen's voters are kind of, they're fixed in place, as it were, you know, as the French would say, fidélisés. And that's what's helping her. So she's able to use that discourse of the victim to kind of say that actually they're coming after me. I'm much less guilty than anybody else. That sounds perverse, but I think that's why she manages to push it to one side.
All right, let's give, at this point in time, everybody the latest on what's been grabbing headlines this Monday on the campaign trail. What's been grabbing headlines is a communiqué from François Fillon, the conservative candidate, rushing to the defense of National Front supporters. That's because outside of a rally by Le Pen on Sunday in the Atlantic coast city of Nantes, anti-far-right demonstrators pelted buses of Marine Le Pen supporters and clashed with police. Fillon blames the government for what he calls, quote, a near state of civil war, a claim he reiterated on a campaign stop east of Paris.
I'm fighting against the National Front with all my strength, but I cannot accept that buses be stopped on the highway as if we were in the Wild Wild West. I've reached out to Bernard Cazeneuve several times about the passivity of the government when it comes to violence. The passivity in Seine-Saint-Denis over the past few weeks, passivity in Paris when high schools were blocked. Bernard Cazeneuve has called for responsibility, but the responsibility is all his.
As for the government, it says those remarks are a red herring, a distraction from Fillon's legal bothers.
Being in politics requires a certain dignity, perspective and duty towards truth, even during electoral campaigns. I understand that certain candidates might be tempted to use controversies to hide their difficulties on the campaign trail.
Constance Le Grip, is France in a state of near civil war?
No. Personally, I wouldn't have used these words. But it's true that there is a lot of political tensions nowadays, that a lot of demonstrations have been violent for weeks and weeks, maybe month and month here, and that a lot of French citizens have the feeling that no order and no real state authority is respected anymore. So I think that François Fillon, like other candidates, has the right to tell the voters that the restoration of the order and of the state authority is one of the main priorities. That's what our voters, our French voters, want to listen. And it's true that we have an unpleasant situation, a lot of tensions, violence. It's not civil war, because civil war is something that fortunately we don't have yet, but I mean that, yes, demonstrations, some kind of very violent tensions in suburbs, in a lot of different places have taken place here.
These were counter-demonstrators throwing rocks at a bus, which I'm not condoning, but there were no serious injuries.
He wasn't talking especially about this event. There has been other demonstrations, other events with the high schools a few days ago, and with attacks against nearly every night in suburbs around Paris against policemen, against firemen, etc. So this is the real situation. This is the real situation.
Nicholas Winokur, of course, there's competing narratives when it comes to the recent spike in violence that we've seen in working-class suburbs. Young people outraged by the case of a young man who was brutalized and, in fact, who was sexually assaulted by 4 police officers. It was caught on camera.
It certainly has been, headline-grabbing event. I would just point out, if you compare the reaction that we've had in the past few weeks to the TO violence to what we saw in 2005, I'm not sure if you were here, but those were really frightening days, and we had riots, and we had standing battles between police and youth in the suburbs, and in those days, it would have been appropriate to use the words, expressions like civil war, and in fact, I don't remember people using that expression in that period, except for the very far right elements. I think, again, this is a campaign that is constantly moving into areas of extreme and
is this the Trump playbook when he talks about Chicago being what is it? I forget where his words were, but describing it something along those lines.
Absolutely. I think we're seeing many spillovers from the Trump campaign, things that were authorized implicitly in the U.S. presidential campaign, attacking the media, attacking the judiciary, and having a complete disregard for the real meaning of words and their weight in the public sphere.
Stéphane de Navassem?
Maybe just a couple of comments. 2000, the riots you're talking about, 2005, that was one of the 3 times when the state of emergency was declared for a portion of France. So that sort of makes it a legal civil war in a way. And of course, we are now in a different state of emergency. We've talked about it on France 24 previously. I think that when it comes to political debate, there is no minimal acceptable violence. Because what's next? Speech, hate speech is too much. Violence is another step. So if you can beat up someone, if you can throw something at someone, if that's acceptable, so what would be too much? Just stabbing someone, And I think we really need to accept that it is not at all okay in the political debate to have these behaviors. And the attacks of François Fillon, or the criticism of François Fillon is a criticism of the executive branch in this case for not doing their work overseeing the police, not one against the judges. 2 separate issues.
Paul Smith, taking aim at judges, taking aim at the press, and a tone that on the part of politicians that's, I guess, a bit unbridled. We've been surprised to see that as well in the UK.
Yes, but I think that it's one of my colleagues there hit the nail very much on the head, that there's this kind of you use exaggerated language, you use exaggerated gestures, and then you apologize afterwards. But the point is, you've already, François Fillon's words are exaggerated, and then you can kind of row back from that, but you've already let the cat out of the bag. And I think that's part of that's kind of the setup, not just as you mentioned the US, and it's happening in France and in Britain as well, that there is this, we've kind of been pushed to extremes of language and behavior that are not acceptable, but they seem to be ways of, it's a bit like this assistant to the Prime Minister talking about disability benefits in this country only for the very disabled, and then apologising for using that expression. But that seems to be the way it goes, that you go to the extreme and then you row back. But the point is, you've already put the extreme out there.
Is it because, Nicholas Winokur, and I know you've been reporting on the influence of social media on the campaign, is it because, well, you got to shout a little bit louder these days to be heard?
I think social media has had such an impact on how democracy works that we're unable to measure it for the time being. And we may measure it in 10 years or 20 years when we see how deeply this affected the functioning of our democracy. The thing about social media is that you can say what you want and you can't be held personally accountable for it. And supporters of all candidates, I'm not singling out any one, have used social media to say things that they would not themselves say with their name and with their face showing, to hide behind anonymity, to hide sometimes behind false profiles, all types of false behavior, and say things that would have been unacceptable before, and create the impression, often completely manufactured, of some kind of democratic rising on social media, when what we're talking about are really either paid volunteers or an organized system of I think it is, on all sides, it has unleashed ugly instincts into public speech, and we're not able to quantify it or deal with it yet, but it is a fact of life now. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Opinion polls the past few days all tell the same story. Marine Le Pen in front on the night of April the 23rd. That'll be after the first round. And then losing to Emmanuel Macron on May the 7th in the runoff. I say Emmanuel Macron, he's that independent candidate who's was the economy minister under the outgoing socialist president, François Hollande. And these polls came out earlier in the day. There's one that's come out just in the past couple of hours. It was done by IFOP, and it gives 26% for Le Pen and 24.5%, Nicolas Winokur, for Macron. The gap closing in the first round. Nonetheless, that's a healthy chunk for the far-right candidate.
She's still in first place in the first round, and the problem with that, or the great thing if you're one of her supporters, is that you can have a situation where after the first round, she has such a high score that it looks like she has a mandate, a popular mandate, that she has momentum, that she has such a groundswell of support that this propels her into the second round and legitimizes her candidacy in the second round. And I think what's happened now in the polls, we've seen the mainstream so-called acceptable candidate come within essentially a measurable distance from the far-right candidate. And if you recall the Brexit campaign, you recall the U.S. presidential election, we were within 2 months of the vote, we were within that 20 percentage point difference between the winning and the losing camp.
Lots of reactions on the hashtag F24 debate, including one saying, couldn't Fillon and Macron form a coalition to defeat Le Pen? Constance Le Grip, what would you think of that idea?
It's not a good idea. I think that we need strong, clear, coherent political lines. That's what we need in democracy. And so a coalition, a kind of Front Républicain against Marine Le Pen wouldn't be what we need.
We're already seeing a little bit of it, though, aren't we? We're seeing a lower number of candidates this time around who will be getting the needed signatures to run. We almost saw, though it didn't happen, an alliance between the socialists and the communist-backed far-left candidate.
It didn't happen at all.
It didn't happen at all, but we did see the socialist candidate merge with the green candidate. These kinds of alliances that normally happen between the two rounds of the presidential election are happening earlier.
Yeah, maybe not only because of political reasons. There can also be some financial or legal reasons why one candidate can't achieve, his candidacy as is obliged to form an alliance. But I don't think that the French democracy will win if there is an anti-Le Pen coalition, and that this could be the solution. No. We need political commitment on very clear, coherent and strong political lines.
Yeah, Paul Smith, that's the whole dilemma, isn't it, for those who are watching this closely, is it an anti-Le Pen coalition, or is it just simply that voters, as you heard Constance Le Grip just say, they want their left-wingers to be left-wing and their right-wingers to be right-wing?
Well, Well, I think the French voters understand what the system is, that they will, classically we always say about French presidential elections that in the first round you vote for the candidate you want, and in the second round you vote against the one you don't. And what has to happen is that it kind of plays out, and then left-wing voters will have to decide if things go as we anticipate them. And I think you made the point that we're still a couple of months away from the first round. There are still things that could go seriously wrong or seriously right for some candidates, but it will play out. And then if we're in a Macron versus Le Pen situation, then Fillon and the others who've been eliminated will have to make their choices about who they call on their electors to vote for, and left-wing voters will have to think very long and hard about what they want. But I don't think that, I think that Constance is quite right, that the idea of a pre-first round coalition is a non-starter. It's not really, it's not the culture, it's not the way that it works. But I do think that there's a danger of a lot of voters feeling excluded after the first round. And then, of course, what becomes very interesting after the presidential election is the parliamentary elections that follow on afterwards, because that could be, a complete, we could be into completely new territory when those come along.
Yeah, those parliamentary elections will matter a lot, and are part of the calculus, if you will, into forming or not forming alliances ahead of the presidential poll. We were talking a moment ago about how France is specific, but there's also common threads. We were talking about it when it comes to Britain and the Brexit vote, the United States and Donald Trump. In fact, it's cries of conspiracy. Again, we talked about it in part one of our discussion. We're hearing them here. We're hearing them on both sides of the Atlantic these days.
Mm-hmm. They're corporatist, globalist media that are adamantly opposed to an economic nationalist agenda like Donald Trump has.
Our country is in the clutches of a twin totalitarianism, as you know, Islamist totalitarianism and a globalist financial totalitarianism.
Yeah, we're hearing very similar kind of messages from those two. One about the media, and the other more about how globalization is a conspiracy.
I think these are arguments that are used that are outside the normal realm of political speech and democratic debate. You've seen the Trump campaign go and borrow an expression that is born in Turkey about the deep state, which is responsible for all types of woes, and the deep state is plotting against the government, and go and transposing that into the United States. When Turkey is giving lessons to the United States about how democracy works, I think it gives you a sense of the situation we're in, and how quickly we've moved into a very volatile and dangerous realm of speech. And I think all these politicians feel authorized to say things they wouldn't say before.
Stéphane de Navacelle, I want you to react to something Constance Le Grip said just before the break. There has to be a rethink about the moralization of politics. We heard one of the other candidates talking about François Bayrou, who did not run. Instead, he endorsed Emmanuel Macron, talking about the need for a law of moralization for public life. Those were his words.
Well, we've had a few of those. Just to react to Nicolas' point, people vote for hope and change, and that was Obama's platform, and this was Trump's platform, and it's Madame Le Pen's platform. When things are bad, that's what people do, and then they become irrational and they turn to the social media. But on your question, which I think is very relevant, we've had many of those laws to moralize, public life. We've had the law of 2013, which you mentioned, after the Cahuzac scandal.
It was the French budget minister who was crusading against tax cheats and then was found to have accounts in Singapore and Switzerland.
Exactly, and that led to the creation of the PNF, the National Financial Parquet, with the appointment of Madame Houlette, who was the lead prosecutor in the Fillon case. Now she's transferred to 3 specialized investigating magistrate. I think we have now strong rules, and these strong rules are put in place, and they have consequences. So an elected MP has to prove where his money comes from, what his wealth is, what's his income. and announce influences from parties, lobbyists, and so on. The Loi Sapin 2 we just had put a framework for lobbyists. So all these rules, these laws that we've been putting in place by popular demand are just, you reap what you sow, and that's it. We're just getting what we set, and it's a good thing overall. But transition is always difficult.
Constance Le Grip, you
But
agree?
what we didn't change in French democracy for the moment, and it'll be one of the issues, maybe not the major issues for the coming years, but nevertheless an issue, now that the member of French Parliament will not be able to be mayor at the same time, etc.
Yeah, that's an important point.
It'll
The
change
idea of
the status, and we'll have to change the status of elected officers, means, assistants, teams, etc., etc. If you compare...
Just to explain to our viewers, up until now in France, you could be both mayor, but also member of parliament. In some cases, you could have several hats like this, and now that's being done away with.
Yes, and François Fillon said very clearly that he won't change anything vis-à-vis this.
You're
this law.
solely a member of the European Parliament, nothing else.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm totally devoted to this mandate, and it'll be the case now for all French MPs. And of course, this has to be taken into consideration, and we'll have to consider, if you compare the French status of the elected officers with the French, with the for instance, German or Dutch status, you'll see big differences in status, in possibilities, in teams, etc. So in work, just concrete conditions of work. This can be one of the solutions.
So, I just want a quick point. I think the laws are valid and quite strong if you look at the text. I think the tragic thing is that they're coming in so late, and Marine Le Pen has become more popular not because of it's because of 30, 40 years of views that that people are abusing the system, and parliamentary officials are able to work several jobs and things like this. And only now, when there's a real threat to the establishment, are we pushing through these very stringent laws. And it's the right thing to do, but it's very late.
And Stéphane de Navacelle, do you get the sense that the judiciary branch in France is growing stronger as a result of these reforms?
It's growing considerably stronger. We have
so France has already changed.
It has changed. It has had to change. It is changing, and I think, as Mr. Fillon said, these were practices of the past. Now, whether they're legal or not, that's an issue for the courts. But things are changing dramatically, absolutely, and French companies are, walking the line.
Paul Smith, in the UK, we saw there was the expenses for MPs scandal. That sparked change there as well. And yet there was this populist rage against Westminster, against Brussels and Westminster mixed together, which helped to explain the Brexit vote.
Yes, that's right, because these things take a long time to work themselves out. But you also have to remember that in the British case, you have a very strong tabloid media that loves to go after these sorts of targets. So that, and that's kind of playing itself out as well in a similar way in France. That in fact, when you dig down, when you look at these changes that have been made, that the others have all referred to, you still talk to people on the streets and they still think the system is corrupt, and that hasn't really changed, but actually the law has changed. Now you have these legal powers to go after or to at least to investigate what's happening, and yet that's not really percolating into the public consciousness. The idea that actually, over the last 5-10 years, the Senate and the National Assembly has been trying to clean up its own act as well. The Senate, particularly under Gérard Larcher, has been really trying to clamp down on people who aren't attending, for example, and reduce the amount that they're being paid because they're not actually doing their jobs properly as senators. But these things don't really pass very easily into the public consciousness, and that's the big problem.
All right, and there's, of course, many surprises still to come before the first round. I want to thank you, Paul Smith, for joining us from the University of Nottingham. I want to thank as well Constance Le Grip, Nicolas Veneker, Stéphane de Navacelle. Stay with us.